wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ba'd. So we're going to get started despite more budget cuts that just happened actually. So don't worry, everything's going to be fine. Inshallah. Alright, let's get started. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome to our program about Islamic inheritance. So today we're going to be talking about the verses in the Quran, as well as generally what the religion of Islam teaches about inheritance. Now, inheritance refers to what happens to a person's wealth and all of their belongings when they die and when they pass away. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the verses of the Quran which talk about inheritance, and there's only a few of them, and we're going to kind of extract certain principles and then go over some scenarios on how we're going to deal with this, with the topic of inheritance. So I want to achieve two things by doing it this way. I teach a 5-hour class on inheritance. This is going to be a condensed 1-hour short version of that class. But I want to do two things. One is we want to learn the basics of inheritance in Islam. And the second thing we want to do is we want to learn how to go through the Quran, read the verses of the Quran, and kind of read in some more depth of meaning inside the verses so that we can have an understanding of how to interpret the Quran. So I could just give you the rules of inheritance and not mention any verses, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine the verses of the Quran, because these ones are a little bit more complex, and then we're going to combine that with extracting the principles of Islamic inheritance on this topic. Okay? Does that sound good? Excellent, very good. So let's begin. So what I've done is I have put all of these verses into the slideshow. Unfortunately, the PowerPoint on a PC is very different than a PowerPoint on a Mac. So as you can see, the Arabic is completely messed up and it has just destroyed everything completely. So I'm going to go ahead and read the verse to you. And if you want, yeah, you're not going to see it from my laptop. But unfortunately, like I said, we had some budget cuts. We could not get the other computer to work for some reason. So just follow along with me. The translation part is going to be clear. Okay? So the first verse of inheritance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah An-Nisa, which is chapter 4 of the Quran. This is the verse that is titled about women. It talks about inheritance. Primarily the verses on inheritance are in this surah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, after أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, لِلرِّجَالِ نَصِيبٌ مِمَّا تَرَكَ الْوَالِدَانِ وَالْأَقْرَبُونَ. He says that for males is the share out of what parents and family leave behind. And then he says, وَلِلنِّسَاءِ نَصِيبٌ مِمَّا تَرَكَ الْوَالِدَانِ وَالْأَقْرَبُونَ. And for females is a share of what parents and family leave behind, مِمَّا قَلَّ مِنْهُ أَوْ كَثُرٍ, whether it is little or much. So it doesn't matter if the wealth that you leave behind is a little bit or it's a lot. The amount doesn't matter. It has to be distributed in a specific way. And then it says, نَصِيبًا مَفْرُوضًا, a share ordained by God. Okay, thank you. Jamal, by the way, is there a way to kind of adjust the microphone? Is it sounding a little weird in here? Yeah. It's sounding weird for me, so I don't know. If we could just get... No, I don't think that's the issue. Is that the issue? Can we make it loud and without the echo? Is that possible? There's like an annoying echo, not like a cool echo. If we can get like the Makkah type echo, that would be cool. I sound fine? It's only me that's hearing myself weird? So, okay, you sit here with me, and then you're going to see if it's fine. Okay. No, that's fine. Everything's fine? Okay, that's fine. I will sacrifice the annoyance for everyone else, inshallah. Alhamdulillah, I'll take one for the team. All right, so the verse number is chapter 4, verse 7. It's in that's the only part that came out on the Mac properly. All right, so Alhamdulillah, 4, verse 7. So this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying. So when we look at this verse, what we notice is, it's saying first of all, males are going to get a specific inheritance. And then it says, and then females are going to get a certain inheritance. Now this is really interesting because if you think this is 1400 years ago, this is a time where the vast majority of civilizations and religions excluded women mostly from inheritance. Now what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doing in the Quran? He's mentioning male and female, and they're both getting a share, and they're both getting their separate sentences. Just an entire sentence to repeat that whole thing was not needed in the Arabic language. Because in the Arabic language, for those of you who've taken some Arabic, when you use the male pronoun, it automatically includes the females as well. And there's no need to use a separate, there's no need to repeat that there's going to be women as well, especially in a verse like this. But not only that, there's no need to repeat the entire sentence as a whole. So that in and of itself is revolutionary when you look at it. And in fact, it's interesting, there was an Orientalist scholar who definitely doesn't like Islam. His name was Joseph Schacht. If you've heard of him, he's a specialist in the field of hadith, but this guy, definitely not pro-Islam. And he says, in one of his books on Islamic law, he says that if you look at it, we have to admit that the verses in the Quran about inheritance and women inheriting and the way that it's phrased is revolutionary, and no one has ever seen anything like that in the world prior to that. And he says we have to give them that. And then the rest of his book is like against Islam, right? But at least he gave that, right? So it is truly revolutionary, and everyone acknowledges that. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Mimma qalla minhu aw kathur." It doesn't matter whether it's a little bit or a lot. So the principle that we get here is that any small amount or any large amount, it needs to be distributed. Nothing, you can't just say, oh, I don't really have that much money to give. I hear this a lot from people. They say, what am I going to make a will? I have to distribute my inheritance. For what? I don't have much money. I'm poor. I don't have much left. I have a lease on my car, and I have like a few bucks here and there. Allah is saying in the Quran, it doesn't matter if it's a lot. It doesn't matter if it's a little. It needs to be distributed in a certain way, because there are rights, and with rights come responsibilities for the ones who have to execute those rights. And then he says, نَصِيبًا مَفْرُوضًا, a share ordained. Now this is a very important term, because the word mafruḍa comes from a term that many Muslims know as fard. Fard means, like you have your fard prayers, and then you have your sunnah prayers. Fard means mandatory. It means it's not an option. It's something that is required. It's something that is a necessity for Muslims to do. So what we're going to be covering in this session is not something that is optional for Muslims. They say, that's really good advice that Allah is giving. Maybe we should follow it. Maybe it's a sunnah. Maybe it's recommended. No, this is a requirement that has to be done. And if it's not done, people are going to be held responsible for it. And the word that's being used is from fard, mafruḍa. So it's a requirement. So now before I move on to the next slide, there's a few things I want to discuss. So this kind of sets the framework for inheritance. So what does it mean? What does inheritance mean? And why is there a law of inheritance? Well, basically what's happening is when a person dies, all of their belongings don't belong to them anymore. And they have to be distributed, they have to go somewhere. And when they die, the stuff that they own, or the stuff that they possess, it's called their estate. All of their belongings together combined. And this is going to be distributed to specific people. Now there are specific rules which we're going to be covering, but the reason why these rules exist, before we even get into the details, is that it reminds a Muslim that they are not in absolute control of their wealth to distribute the way that they want to. And this is very different from a lot of people's perception. Because people's perception is when you write a will, you decide who's going to get what. So I'm going to give this one child, that child got straight A's in school, I'm going to give him 25%. And that daughter, she wasn't listening to me, she married that guy that I didn't want her to marry, I'm going to give her 5%. And that other, my brother always had my back. I'm going to give him 25% too. This doesn't work in Islam. You don't have the option to distribute your wealth however you want to. But instead, there are fixed shares that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has fixed in the Quran. And this kind of is a reminder that it's not up to us. This is a test of obedience to Allah and to trust that Allah knows better how this should be divided. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that once we learn these rules, it is essential that every single Muslim who has any money to leave, whether it's a little bit or it's a lot, they have to make sure that their inheritance and their estate is going to be divided according to these rules. Now, if you live in a country like America, or you live in many other countries of the world where Islamic law is not the default, right? Or in fact, it may not even be allowed. You have 33 states with anti-Sharia bills, right? But you have to set up a system such that this will actually go into effect. And in order for that to happen, you need to either, one, write a will, or two, you need to make a trust. And we're going to talk about these things a little bit more, right? And these are the two main ways for it to take place. That means that if you don't have one of these two things, and you have even $100, even if you have $10, and you die, and you pass away, and your money is not going to get distributed according to the way that Allah is teaching us in the Quran, it means that you're going to be held accountable in front of Allah on the Day of Judgment because you did not take any precautions or any measures to make sure that this gets implemented. Right, so a lot of people, what they'll do is when they go for Hajj, they're planning to go and make the pilgrimage to Mecca, they'll say, now it's time to write a will. Now, this is not the way that it works, actually. You're supposed to have a will whenever you have something to leave behind. The reason why people do that when they're about to go for pilgrimage, do you know why that is? Does anyone know? Because you're afraid you might die, right? But if you, before you go for pilgrimage, if you go to visit the pyramids in Egypt, or if you go to France on a vacation, you also might die. In fact, you don't have to travel. You might be on the freeway and you could die. So this idea of connecting like one specific event with making a will, it's incorrect perception that people have. The will is supposed to be made when you have something to leave. In fact, it's so important that the Prophet, peace be upon him, said in a hadith narrated in Sahih al-Bukhari, he said, it is not befitting for a Muslim who has something to make a will of to remain for 2 nights without having one's last will and testament written and kept ready with one. Meaning you keep it ready. So not only should you have a will or a trust, but you should be able to have access. If you die and you put your will inside your safe and nobody knows that it's in a safe and nobody knows the combination, no one can find your will, it's not going to get executed properly. There's going to be issues, right? So you have to make sure that it's your responsibility by living in a country or in a region that's not automatically going to distribute things for you. It's your personal responsibility to make sure that this ends up happening. نَصِيبًا مَفْرُوضًا. And then the next thing is that in order for someone to inherit, they have, one, you have to be pronounced legally dead before your assets are going to be distributed. So no money transfers until you actually die. Now, how does someone die? There's real death, and then there's legal death. So in the past, people used to, go travel somewhere, and then the person is missing. And if they're missing for a long period of time, they can be, after a while, they could be pronounced legally dead. We don't know where this person is. Their family's left behind. They disappeared somewhere. They could be sitting in a prison. They could have disappeared. They could have died. Maybe they're alive. Maybe they'll show up 10 years later. All of a sudden, they come back 10 years afterwards. So if they're pronounced legally dead, or if they actually die, right? Brain death versus cardiac death is cardiac death. Like actually die, then in that case, the money is going to be distributed to the heirs. In order for the heir, the person who's going to be inheriting is called the heir. In order for an heir to inherit, they must be alive for at least a moment after the person that they're going to be inheriting from had died. So for example, if there is a car accident, right? There's a car crash, and there's 2 people in the car, and they're family members, and one is going to inherit from the other one. And one of them is pronounced dead at the scene. The other one ends up in the hospital but is still alive. And one is going to inherit from the one that died, because one died and one is still alive, but then that person dies in the hospital 3 hours later. Okay? That is sufficient in Islam for that person to inherit from the other person because they were alive for a moment, and we have proof of that. If they both died in the car accident and they died at the same time and we cannot determine who died first, we just kind of assume we don't know which one died first, they do not inherit from each other. And the rest of their heirs are going to be getting it. So even if someone died 3 hours later or 1 hour later after the other person, and then that person died, this person's money share will transfer to this person, then this person's rest of their money is going to transfer to the rest of their heirs. Okay, so they have to be alive for at least a little bit of time after the other person. There's one exclusion principle for someone who can inherit. And this is the Prophet, peace be upon him, made this rule. And he clarified this rule. He says that if someone participates in the murder of another person, they will not inherit from the person that they killed. Right? This is a really important rule, because you find some people, they try to expedite getting their inheritance by killing off a family member, right? And then, that's a huge problem. So that'll just incentivize these type of killings. So in order to prevent these type of killings, a person is going to be excluded if they played a part in the killing or in the murder of the person who they were going to be inheriting from. And the last thing is the property that you're going to pass off when you pass away. It needs to be clearly defined who this property belongs to, who actually owns this property. So one of the challenges of today is ownership is very different than it used to be. So today when we own something, you can own the thing entirely, or you can own it 50-50, or you could have, like, let's say you have 4 brothers, each of you own a home, and you each own 25% of that home, right? Or oftentimes spouses, they own something, and they own it jointly. But there's other clauses that exist within that ownership. So what ends up happening, for example, is that people may have a type of ownership, they have joint ownership with the right of survival. Or what that basically means is, okay, we're owning this house together at the same time, and different states have different laws and different countries have different laws, but we don't have like some kind of fixed percentage of ownership. It's considered a certain type of joint ownership. And then when one of those people dies, the other person gets 100% ownership of that item or that commodity or whatever it may be, a house or a car or a business or whatever it may be. So what ends up happening is sometimes you don't have a clear-cut definition of who owns what in any particular asset. And that becomes challenging. So what needs to be done is that the ownership of things needs to be very clearly defined from a legal perspective and from an Islamic perspective in order for inheritance law to function correctly and function properly. Okay? So that's just the introduction to the first verse. Let's move on to the next verse, and I'll take questions at the end. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يُوصِيكُمُ اللَّهُ فِي أَوْلَادِكُمْ لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ. This is chapter 4, verse 11. He says, God commands you in the matter, in the concerning your children, that for the males is the equivalent of the portion of 2 females. Okay, now this is the verse that comes. Now when people read this, oftentimes they feel like a discomfort. If you grow up in the age of everything must be equal and everything must be the same and everything should be, split across the board, it can be challenging. So I want to point out 2 things here. First of all, that when you try to understand the Islamic inheritance system, you have to look at these rules or these laws in the entire framework of Islam. So in the entire framework of Islam, the man is responsible for the financial well-being and for taking care of all the expenses of the household. The woman is not responsible for that. So the reason why a son is getting a greater share than a daughter is because the financial burden and responsibility on him is going to be significantly greater than on the daughter when she grows up. So that's why there's a difference or there's discrepancy, particularly when it comes to brothers and sisters, when it comes to sons and daughters, when it comes to husbands and wives. But it's also important to keep in mind that people will take this rule and they will generalize. And they'll say, basically Islam says that women are always going to get less than men. And that's an incorrect statement. It's not an accurate statement at all. So let me give you a simple example. somebody dies. I won't write it right now, but I'll come back to this example. Somebody dies. They leave behind a husband, a father, and a daughter. Okay? Husband, father, daughter. How many males are there? 2. How many females are there? 1. Husband, father, daughter. I heard 2. 2 and 2? Husband, father, 1 daughter. Yeah. Where's the 2 females? Yeah, Oh, she's dead. She died. Yeah. You got me confused. I'm like, did I mess up this presentation already? Okay. So we got 2 males and 1 female, right? Okay. So we got husband, father, and daughter. Okay. How much does the husband get? Does anyone know? Well, you're gonna know by the end of this session, inshallah. Husband gets 1/4. Okay. All right. How much does the father get? 1/4. How much does the daughter get? Half. So the daughter is getting double of the male, of 1 male, and double of the other male. So the female is getting double of both males in this scenario. And there's hundreds or thousands of scenarios like this. So it's incorrect to say that the women are always getting less. That's not the case at all, if we understand the Islamic inheritance law correctly. Only when they're at the same level of, son and daughter, brother and sister, things like that, they're going to be getting a shorter share. And the reason behind that, if we just think about it, is because the economic responsibility on one is different from the economic responsibility on the other. So it's important to keep that in mind, okay? So let me give you one example of this, okay? If somebody dies, we're just going to apply this rule. This is pretty simple. Somebody dies and they leave behind only 1 son and 1 daughter. And we're applying this rule that you're saying the male gets the equivalent of the portion of 2 females. How many shares do we need? How many shares do we need? 2 people remain. How many shares do we need to divide the pie into? 3, correct. So how much does the son get? 2 shares, which becomes 2/3. And the daughter gets 1/3. So if they have $100,000, you split it up, 1/3 and 2/3 of the $100,000, okay? That's the simplest example you're following so far. Let's move to the next verse. Then Allah says, فَإِن كُنَّ نِسَاءً فَوْقَ اثْنَتَيْنِ فَلَهُنَّ ثُلُثَا مَا تَرَكَ. If there are more than 2 females, okay, meaning that there's no males there, then for them is 2/3 of the inheritance, okay? So if you got 2 daughters, for example, or 2 sisters, something like that, they're going to get 2/3 of the entire piece of the pie. وَإِن كَانَتْ وَاحِدَةً فَلَهَا النِّصْفُ. And if there is only 1, she's going to get half. Okay, so I'm going to start writing some of these fractions down on the board because we're going to start doing some calculations very soon. So what we got so far is, yeah, I knew that would happen. All right, so again, I told you these budget cuts are not helping. So, secure. Oh, there we go. That's all that was needed to be done. MashaAllah. Jazakumullah khair. All right, so what we got here so far is son, daughter. Can't even spell daughter. Yeah, I'm getting there. I'm still thinking about the budget cuts. Daughter. So the first rule is we got 1 to 2. Okay? So that's rule number 1. Rule number 2 is we got a daughter. Daughter gets half, right? 2 daughters get, what do they get? 2/3. Okay. So far so good. All right. So these are the rules that we have so far. Now let's take an example. No, you're right. 2 to 1. Thank you. Yeah. Is that good? It's better? Okay. 2 to 1. Okay. So we got 2 rules here. So let's take a scenario. I have some practice scenarios here. Okay. So we got a daughter, and let's say a person dies, okay? The D means the deceased person. The person dies, and they leave behind one daughter and one nephew. Okay? How much a daughter gets? Half. Where does the rest of the money go? Does it go to the daughter? Okay. So here's the rule. The Prophet, peace be upon him, he said, this is a hadith in Bukhari and Muslim, said, give the shares of inheritance to those who are entitled to them. So the fixed shares that are there, we did that. And whatever is left goes to the closest male relative. So the closest male relative, there's no father here, there's no son here, there's no brother here, there's no uncle here, we got the nephew. Okay? So the nephew gets the remainder, which is how much? Half. Okay? So that one's simple. So that's good. Let's take another scenario. Person dies. They leave behind two daughters and two uncles. Okay? How much did two daughters get? 2/3. Who gets the rest? How much? Who? The two uncles get the rest. How much do they get? 1/3. So how much do they get each? Each they get 1/6 each. Okay? And you figure out how much the person had left, and this is what you get. Okay, so far so good. These are the simple examples. All right, let's move on. So now we are on, which slide are we on? Slide 5. Let's move on. I'll take the questions a little bit later. Is it directly related to this? Okay, go ahead then.
Okay, for the one daughter that only have, what happens if she's the only one that is with the family?
There's nobody else in the family, she'll get the rest.
The whole thing?
If there's nobody else, yeah.
Okay.
If there's nobody else to inherit.
Because it's only saying half, so I'm wondering where the half goes.
So in this scenario, there's a nephew. So the nephew gets the other half. Yeah, you get that? So yeah, so because he's the closest remaining male relative. Okay, we'll come. Yeah, we're coming. We're okay. 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 So got it. So here's the way it works. So that's a good question. So the thing is, the person who died, the deceased, only their property is being distributed because they're the only ones that died. So if they don't own a certain, let's say the deceased died, this person died, and this was, let's say this was the father of this daughter, and then there was the wife. Well, she would be in this scenario, but someone else, right? They own property with them, but they don't own any other property. Their property doesn't get distributed. So your question about what if they don't have ownership in some... How can ownership belong to a deceased mother? If she's dead, she can't own something. But once she died... I'm not following. You get it? Okay. Okay. Okay, I got it. So the thing, if somebody inherits wealth from someone else, it doesn't matter where it's coming from. Now it completely belongs to this person. It's in their ownership. It doesn't matter where it came from, as long as it's legitimate transfer. It's not a drug dealer or something like that, right? So now it belongs to this person. Doesn't matter where it's coming from. Now, whatever this person owns, however they're getting all their money from inheriting from family members, this family member's, wife's side of the family, all of the things that they belong to them, it's going to go to who now is directly connected with them because that's who their family is. So it doesn't matter what channel the money is coming through. Does that answer that? Yeah. Okay. Inshallah, inshallah, we'll get to it. Yeah. Yeah, so here's what I mean. So when this person died, okay, do we know if it's a man or woman? Yeah, because I just said the person has a daughter, okay? I haven't even told you who it is, right? It has a daughter, has a nephew. If it was a man, if he had a wife, she already died. If it was a wife and she had a husband, he already died too. That's why they're not mentioned here. If they were mentioned, then they would be alive. If they're alive, then we're going to cover it in the next 2 slides, which is what we're getting to. Right now, they're all dead. All right, all dead. All right. All right. Coming, inshallah, coming soon. Okay, so now let's look at the next scenario. Okay, we're not done. This is all one verse in the Quran. We're still on this verse. All right, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلِأَبَوَيْهِ لِكُلِّ وَاحِدٍ مِّنْهُمَا السُّدُسُ مِمَّا تَرَكَ إِن كَانَ لَهُ وَلَدٍ. Says, as for the parents of the deceased, okay, for each of the two is 1/6 of the inheritance in case of his having left a child. Okay, so it's saying that the parents get 1/6 if what? What's the if scenario? If they left a child. Okay? So, mom and dad, right? Parents. What are they getting? 1/6 if there's a child. Okay? So let's keep reading. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَإِن لَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ وَلَدٌ وَوَرِثَهُ أَبَوَاهُ فَلِأُمِّهِ الثُّلُثُ. And if they have, where'd it go? But if he's left no children, and his parents are his only heirs, then for his mother is 1/3. Okay? So the scenario here is that the mom gets, this is another rule, kind of a sub-rule, the mom gets 1/3, in which scenario? No child. Okay? But we're not done yet. And then it says, وَلَوَرِثُ أَبَوَاهُ فَلِأُمِّهِ الثُّلُثُ فَإِن كَانَ لَهُ إِخْوَةٌ فَلِأُمِّهِ السُّدُسُ. Okay, so he says, if, where is the translation? If he has a surviving mother and together with or without sisters, 2 or more surviving brothers, then for his mother is 1/6. So if there are 2 or more brothers, okay, we haven't even covered brothers in detail, but if you got 2 plus brothers, what happens to the mom's share? 1/6. Okay, so kind of like this. So basically you have, if there's a child, or if there's 2 or more brothers or sisters, you get back to, mom goes back to 1/6. If there's no kids, mom is extra happy in one way, right? She's gonna be happy with kids. If she's not, doesn't have kids, she's gonna be happy she gets extra inheritance, right? So she's gonna get 1/3. Now continuing on with this same verse. It says, Min ba'di wasiyatin yusabi. Okay, let me break this down with some scenarios here. Okay, so now what's happening is mom is getting 1/3 or 1/6, and dad is getting, what is dad getting? 1/6. But dad is also in another category. And what's that category that we mentioned? Nearest male. Okay? So the nearest surviving male, dad can become the nearest surviving male. And if he does, then he also gets the remainder. Okay, the remainder that we were looking at. So let's take a scenario of this. Let's see. Okay, let's take somebody dies. Okay, this is the deceased person. They just died. And they left dad, mom, and a daughter. Okay? Dad, mom, and a daughter. How could you leave your dad alive? Depends on your family relationship, right? So look, so this is, if somebody dies, can their mom and dad still be alive? Well, of course, right? Can their daughter still be alive? Yeah, no problem, right? So now what's going to happen? So we're going to look, first thing we do, Start with the daughter because she's easy, right? She's easy because she's either what? She's either half or she's 2/3. In this case, she's half, okay? So we give the daughter 1/2, okay? Now we go to mom, okay? Is there a child? There's a child, the daughter. So what does mom get? 1/6. Okay? What does dad get? 1/6 because there's a child plus who gets the rest? The dad. Okay? So we got 1/2 plus 1/6. What is the remainder that the dad is going to get? Well, I'm going to do this for you because I know some people forgot the fraction math. So we got to put this over the same common denominator. So 1/2 you multiply by 3/3, and what do you get? 2 times 3, 6. 1 times 3, 3. So you have 3/6 plus 1/6 for the mom. So you have 4/6. What is the remainder? So 6/6 minus 4/6 equals 2/6. Reduce it, and what do you get? 1/3. So what does dad get? 1/3. That's the whole thing, okay? So this is how it ends up breaking down. So we just saw the rule. We saw the rule. We added it to our arsenal of rules and everything, and it breaks down to this fraction, okay? Let's take another scenario. Can I erase this? No. Does not matter if it's minor, married, none of this matters. None of this is significant. So, okay, so good question. So I'm going to throw out one more rule which we're not going to be covering in detail, and that is that brothers and sisters are blocked by son and dad. Okay, so if there were brothers and sisters, what happened to the brothers and sisters? Dad blocked them. They get nothing. Okay? Yes. He's going to get the remainder. He's going to end up getting the remainder. 1/6 plus the remainder. If there's a child, he's just going to get the remainder, which is a very big share anyways. Yeah, so he's going to be fine, right? So in this case, he's doing well. So if you took out the daughter, dad's doing well, economically. I'm just saying from that perspective, right? So he's going to be getting a lot more. So it's going to work out well for him. That's why he didn't need a separate share. So that's kind of the way it works. All right, let's take another example. How much time do we have? I don't want to overdo. Oh, wow, subhanAllah. Okay, time is flying. So should we do? No, I think we're done. So let's just move on because we got a lot more to cover. All right, so moving on. Let's move to the next rule here. It says, "Min ba'di wasiyatin yusi biha aw dayn." This is all the same verse, by the way. It's after deduction for any bequest that he may have made and any debt. So it's saying bequest and debt. So what is this verse talking about? This whole verse is saying these are the rules to distribute your inheritance, and it breaks down some of them, and it says only after the wasiyah, the bequest, has been distributed or a debt has been done. Okay? So now this is very important. There are certain rules or priorities that you have to follow. So priority number 1, when a person dies with their wealth, the number 1 priority is that their funeral expenses get paid from their own estate. Okay? So when they die, if they left behind $12,000 and burial preparation and burial costs in Orange County end up being very expensive, and it turns out to be $9,000 for the entire burial and everything. That has to be taken from their estate. So their heirs are going to be left with how much money? $3,000 split between them. Okay? So that is a requirement that's going to be taken out from people. So which is also why, you want to make sure that when you die, if you don't already have your burial plot, you want to leave something behind so other people don't have to be paying for your burial. So that's important. So that's the first priority, number one. Then you have debts. You owe other people money. So the question is, do you have to pay off your debts before your funeral expenses, or your funeral expenses before your debts? So here's the order. Funeral comes first, because you got to be buried. Then the people who you owe money to, they're going to go ahead and get the money. And then after that, the bequest that you have made is going to be distributed. So you're thinking, what the heck is a bequest? So what a bequest basically is that's the part of the will where you get to leave whatever you want to whoever you want with some restrictions. So the bequest is where you get the flexibility to kind of divide your wealth the way you want. Okay? So it's almost like your prayer. In prayer, you have to recite Surah Fatiha in the beginning, and then you get to choose which surah you want to do afterwards, right? So you got some parts that are fixed, some parts where you get to choose, something similar like that. So the bequest is, it's called wasiyah, where you write and you say, I would like to leave 10% of my property to the orphans in Palestine, and I want to give it to this charity. And this is, this money is going to be distributed. So that wasiyah, that bequest, has to be distributed before your heirs will actually get their money, because that 10% first gets deducted from your estate, and then once it's deducted, then the rest of it's going to be split according to these fractions. So first comes the burial expense, second comes the debts, and if you have collateral that you had in your possession or something, you have to return it, and then the third is going to be distribution of this bequest that you have. Now there are a few rules when it comes to the bequest that have been explained by the Prophet, peace be upon him, clearly in the hadith, and we'll go over a little bit of those. So among those rules, number one is that the bequest has a maximum of 1/3. You cannot donate, you cannot bequest more than 1/3 of your wealth. And the reason why is because if you said, I want to give 90% of all my wealth to the orphans in some charity or something like that, how much money are you going to have left for your heirs? You've potentially excluded your heirs from all of this other money. And you're not supposed to do that, because you're not supposed to go up to a high limit like that. So that's rule number one. I'm coming, inshallah. Rule number one. Rule number two, okay? You cannot write a bequest to someone who's already going to be inheriting. So you cannot say, well, I want my son to get 10%. Your son's already part of the inheritance. I want my mom to get 15%. But she's already part of the inheritance. So if you were allowed to give someone who already inherits a bequest, then you'd be overriding the rules that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put. There's no point of him putting rules if you're going to get to override it anyways. The only time where you can make a bequest of someone who is going to be an heir is if they end up being blocked. So if they're going to get blocked, like in this scenario we just talked about brothers, right? And brothers get blocked by who? Father and son, right? They're going to be blocked. So in that case, you can leave something to them. Even though they're heirs, they're going to be blocked. If they get blocked, you can make the bequest, the wasiyah, to these people as well. Okay? You can make a conditional bequest as well. So if, for example, you say, you know what? You tell your brother, who's going to be blocked anyways. You know that they're going to be blocked if this person, if the father or the son remains alive. You say, you know what? If you graduate from California Islamic University, I will give you 10% of my wealth. It's a good option, right? You can do that, right? So you can make a conditional bequest, and it'll only be effective if they meet the condition that you have. So whatever condition you put in there, you could do that, okay? And you can give a bequest to anyone. You can even give a bequest to a non-Muslim, right? So if you wanted to leave money to someone who is not a Muslim, or you had non-Muslim family members, for example, according to the majority of scholars, Muslims don't inherit from non-Muslims and vice versa. That's the general rule. According to Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah, Shaykh Ibn al-Qayyim, they said there's an exception to that. We're not going to get into those details. But if you have a non-Muslim family member and you want them to you want to leave something behind for them, you could leave that in the bequest. Up to a maximum of what? 1/3. Okay? Maximum of 1/3. No. If they were going to be blocked, yes. So if the grandchildren were going to be blocked, you could bequest to them. Yes. All right. So now, when you are also making the bequest, you want to put some other things in that aspect as well. So you want to also identify who is going to supervise my burial, who is going to execute my will, who's going to be, maintaining, who's going to be in charge of all of that. You also want to put in there what would I like to happen for the custody of my children. Even though a judge can overrule that, you could potentially put that in there. Or I want my children, when I die, I want them to enroll in California Islamic University. I want them to finish that program. Someone better make sure this happens. This is my last request, right, that I have, or something along those lines. So you put all of that in the bequest. Okay, so that is the bequest, which is executed before the rest of the division of that. And there's like 100 more rules on the bequest, but that's just overview. Okay, let's move on to the next verse. And then it says, آباؤكم وأبناؤكم لا تدرون أيهم أقرب لكم نفعا. Your parents and your children, you don't know which one of them is nearer to you in bringing you benefit. Right? You don't know which one is going to be more beneficial in your life. So what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying here? He's basically saying that all of these shares and this whole system has been fixed for you for a reason. Because you may be emotionally inclined towards certain family members and say, that person helped me and I don't like that person, or that person wasn't listening to me, or something like that. And Allah is reminding you that you don't know who's really supposed to give you the most benefit in your life. And also, this makes it clear that the shares are fixed from Allah so that other family members don't end up feeling excluded. Because imagine what would happen if you keep distributing. You're like, this son's in, this son's out, this father's in, this brother's out, this brother's in, sister's out. They're going to hate you, right? You're going to cause a lot of family divisions. But when they know that this is the rule, this is the system, now you block all of those emotional problems and family problems, animosity between family members. So Allah says, فَرِيضَةً مِّنَ اللَّهِ. This is an ordinance from God for two reasons. Again, clarifying that it's mandatory, and two, that Allah knows better about how He has designed the family system and who's supposed to be helping who. Okay? And then He says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلِيمًا حَكِيمًا. That Allah is the all-knowing and the all-wise, because He instituted this system. Now there's going to be exceptional cases where you got a problem with your son, or you got a problem with your brother, or you got your daughter is not listening to you, or your wife, or whoever it is, and you think, what, I should be allowed to somehow exclude them or disinherit them or something like that. In Islam, you can't do that. You cannot disinherit people for any of these reasons. You say, yeah, but that son, he's gonna, if he inherits that money, he's gonna just buy a Lamborghini the next day after I die. That's not your issue, right? When you die, that wealth was supposed to be distributed. Now, if you distributed your wealth before you passed away, then you have some more, flexibility in how you want to distribute it, okay? Depending on who's obedient, who's disobedient. But once you die, the rules of inheritance are directly enacted, and you have to follow that according to that. You can't disinherit. Like in America, you can disinherit anyone you want, except one state. There's only one state where you can't disinherit your children. Does anyone know what state that is? My two lawyers? Louisiana. Because they use the Napoleonic laws that have been coming from past French. So that's the only one with the exception. Anyways, that's American law. So anyways, so this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminding us and saying, Allah knows better regarding these rules. Then that verse is the same one that we've been covering. This is all part of 11. Yeah. So then we move to 4:12. Okay? So it says, وَلَكُمْ نِصْفُ مَا تَرَكَ أَزْوَاجُكُمْ إِن لَّمْ يَكُنْ لَهُنَّ وَلَدٌ فَإِنْ كَانَ لَهُنَّ وَلَدٌ فَلَكُمُ الرُّبُعُ مِمَّا تَرَكْنَ مِنْ بَعْدِ وَصِيَّةٍ يُوصِينَ بِهَا أَوْ دَيْنٍ. And for you is half of what your wives leave behind. So not speaking to the men here. You get half of what your wives leave behind if they have no children. But if they have a child, you get 1/4 of what they leave behind after the deduction of any bequest that they've made and any debt. So now we got another rule. Let's remove this. What does a husband get? Husband gets half, or if there's no child. And if there's a child, child. Okay? And then I'll just take the next verse as well here. And then it says, وَلَهُنَّ الرُّبُعُ مِمَّا تَرَكْتُمْ إِن لَّمْ يَكُن لَّكُمْ وَلَدٌ فَإِن كَانَ لَكُمْ وَلَدٌ فَلَهُنَّ الثُّمُنُ مِمَّا تَرَكْتُمْ مِن بَعْدِ وَصِيَّةٍ تُوصُونَ بِهَا أَوْ دَيْنٍ. And for them is 1/4 of what you leave behind if you have no children, but if you have a child, then they shall have 1/8 of what you leave behind after deduction for any bequest you may have made and any debt incurred. So now you have wife, okay? Wife is basically 1/4 or 1/8 if there's a child. If child. Okay, now let's take a scenario here. I have a scenario here. Well, I have a comment here. So spouses technically are being included in inheritance even though spouses are not from your blood. So they're not technically part of your family. So why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala include them if technically they can be separated? They're not like permanent family members. It's because it's showing you the sanctity of the marriage contract and shows you what, how important and significant marriage is viewed in Islam. Another quick comment here is, today in Western society, almost everything goes to the spouse. Husband dies, wife gets almost everything. Wife dies, husband gets almost everything. This is one type of system that exists today, but from an Islamic perspective, this is viewed as an extreme system. In the past, it used to be the opposite system, where generally, women were being excluded. Wives in particular were being excluded from inheritance. Spouses were excluded from inheritance. So what ends up happening is we end up going from one extreme to another extreme. In Islam, we look at these rules and we say, hey, wait a minute. If you follow that, what we have today, what about your mom? What about your dad? What about your children? They don't have any right to that? So Islam views family not just as a relationship between two people, but it views family in a more holistic fashion. So all of this is based on, number one, the way in which family is perceived in Islam, and number two, the way in which responsibilities are actually divided among the family in the Islamic system. So let's look at some examples here. We got a husband, a dad, and a daughter. Okay, so somebody dies, left behind husband, dad, father, but this is less letters, and a daughter. Okay, so now, first of all, what gender is the deceased? Alhamdulillah, good, female, okay? This is Islam, assuming, okay? So, you got a husband. So, let's start with the daughter, right? Because the daughter, we got this rule up here. What is the daughter getting? Potentially half or 2/3? Because there's one getting 1/2. Let's move to the husband. What is the husband getting? You go with the person who has the fixed shares first, it's easier. What is the husband getting? Well, is there a child? Yes. Therefore, 1/4. Husband gets 1/4. What is the dad getting? The remainder. What is the remainder? 1/4. Okay, I won't do the algebra on that. Okay, 1/4. Okay, so that one's done. Yes. Correct. So the money will go, so if they're minor and they die and the money is going to them, it's the same way as if they would get money in any other way. Like grandparents give money, parents give money, transfer money in their name. So the money belongs to them, but they will have a custodian over that money. That's it. Inshallah. Okay, so that's one scenario. Let's take one more scenario. I'm going to take a tough scenario, and then I'll skip all the other scenarios. I'll go to the tough one. Okay, so we got husband, just for the sake of time. This is very tough writing. Okay. We got husband, dad, and 2 daughters. Dad, 2 daughters. Okay? So it's very similar to this one, except you got 2 daughters. Okay? So let's see if we can figure it out. What do daughters get? 2 daughters, so they get 2/3. What does the husband get? 1/4. What does the dad get? The remainder. What's the remainder? Okay, so let's calculate it. Right? So what we got is, this is the right scenario, right? Yes. Okay, so let's, we got 1/12? Okay, so 1/4, so I'll show you how to do it. 1/4 over 3, we put it over 12, right? So we get 3 over 12. We got times 4, we get 8 over 12. And what do you end up having? What is 8 over 12 plus 3 over 12? What is 8 twelfths plus 3 twelfths? 11 twelfths. Okay. So 11 twelfths. All right. And what does dad get? The remainder. Okay, good. Let me see one more scenario. No. Made a mistake here. Okay. So husband is clear 1/4. 2 daughters are clear 2/3. All right? But we messed up on the debt. What did we do wrong? Is there a daughter? There's a daughter, right? There's a child. What's the dad's rule? 1/6. Okay? So the dad's supposed to get 1/6, and he would get the remainder, okay? When there's a remainder. Okay? So now if the dad's getting 1/6, what's the remainder? There's not going to be a remainder, right? Okay. So now what's happening here? Now we're gonna add up here. Husband is getting, we put it all over 12. 3 twelfths. 2 daughters are getting 8 twelfths. What is the dad getting? We put this over 12. 2 twelfths. So we got 13 over 12. We got a problem, okay? So the thing is, these shares were designed to be a proportion, a ratio. So what happens is, when you encounter a scenario like this, it's called awl. All right. So now all you got to do, it's not difficult. All you got to do is, you're going to end up reducing the shares of everyone by making this over 13. You just basically make it into 13 shares. So you have a pie, and you made, 12 shares or whatever it is. You're going to redivide this into make it into 13 slices, and then you're going to split it back over. So how do you do that? All right? 2/3 times 13? Where? For the daughters. What about for everyone else? So what do we do with these ones? All we got to do is just basically, these already have their fractions out. Just put it over 13. And you're done. Just change the 12 to 13. And you're done. And it splits out. Everyone gets equal reduction across the board. Okay? So that happens sometimes. And sometimes you get vice versa. So sometimes you'll end up with 7/8. What do you got to do? You got to redistribute the shares back to other people. So everyone gets upgraded a few shares because of that. So there are some scenarios where you find things like that. Inshallah. Is this regarding this? No, we'll come back to the Q&A. I'm almost done, inshallah. All right, I don't want to take too long. All right. So, I wasn't planning on going through this entire verse. Let's see, can you see this verse? There we go. Did we do this one? Yeah, we did this one. So here's 2 verses about a situation called kalala. And kalala is basically where somebody dies and they don't leave behind parents and they don't leave behind children. So what do? There's 2 verses regarding this, and they're extremely detailed, and we're not going to go through them. But one of the reasons why I wanted to cover this is, first of all, we're going to see in this verse different shares. So there are 6 shares that are fixed in the Quran. There's 1/2, 1/4, 1/8, 2/3, 1/3, 1/6. You can see that pretty much here, right? So we got, how many shares? We got 1/4, 1/2, 1/8. Okay, so what is that? Half of a half is a fourth. Half of a fourth is an eighth. Okay, and then you go start with 2/3. What's half of 2/3? 1/3. What's half of 1/3? 1/6. So the only fixed shares you got are 6. 2/3 and a half and a half, and 1/2 and a half and a half. Easy way to remember it. And the rest becomes residuary, or the remainder. Remainder we call residuary, the baqi. All right, so these are pretty much the shares that are mentioned, that are fixed. Now what's interesting is sometimes these can get really complex. But what's really cool is that the fact that Islam came up with these rules actually was an impetus for the development of algebra. I'm serious, this is not, an exaggeration. So I'll tell you exactly what it was. So algebra is an Arabic word in and of itself. It's coming from the word al-jabr. Okay, algebra from the word al-jabr. One of the founders of algebra, or one of the pioneers, was a guy by the name of Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi. Okay, Khwarizmi was from a city called al-Khwarizm. And there is something in mathematics that was named after him. Does anyone remember anything from math that sounds like al-Khwarizm? Algorithm, right? So algorithm is named after him. So he wrote his book, Hisab al-Jabr wal-Muqabala. It's a very, very famous book on algebra. And what happens is 1/3 of the longest chapter in his entire book on algebra is all about Islamic inheritance. Because he's a scholar. He's an Islamic scholar as well. He's a Muslim scholar. So he does that. Then comes another guy. His name was Al-Hassar. He was a mathematician from North Africa, from the Maghrib region. He specialized in Islamic jurisprudence and specialized in Islamic inheritance in particular during the 12th century. So he's the guy who developed the modern symbol notation of the horizontal bar. So you see we're using this bar, 1/3 and 1/4 and all that. That didn't exist until this guy developed it. And then 100 years later you have Fibonacci. Anyone computer science major or engineer, they know the Fibonacci sequence and all that. So he came 100 years later and he started using the same thing that Al-Hassar had developed in the first place. So the bar that we use for fractions actually is coming from a specialist in Islamic inheritance, because he said, hey, this helps us to calculate things in a much easier way. And the last guy in the 15th century, his name was Abul Hasan ibn Ali al-Qalasadi. He was also a specialist in Islamic jurisprudence and in Islamic inheritance. And he's the first guy who basically developed the symbols for algebra. The X's and the Y's and all of that stuff. So this guy developed that, and I found it really interesting. He developed it in Granada, right outside of Granada. And if you study Islamic history of Spain, this is the last city that remained in Spain when it was being taken over during, the Inquisition and Reconquista of Spain. So this guy was living in a fort while Ferdinand and Isabella are attacking the last city of the Muslims in Spain. And while that's happening, he develops the X's and Y's for algebra, which became our modern symbols. So there's still technological development going on while they're under attack, and then he fled back to one of his other cities. So that's a little bit note on that, but I'm not going to go into these details. And then lastly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَصِيَّةً مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَاللَّهُ عَلِيمٌ حَلِيمٌ. So after mentioning all these rules of inheritance, he says, this is a commandment from Allah. The word wasiyah has two meanings. Wasiyah means bequest, when you're making the wasiyah, and wasiyah coming from Allah is that when you die and you make a bequest, you're giving instructions that I want some of my money to be distributed this way. Allah is using the same word wasiyah from Allah. So this wasiyah is to you from Allah, that you gotta follow these rules. It says, Wallahu alimun halim. And Allah is knowledgeable, and Allah is He's merciful. He's patient with people when they don't do the right things. Okay, now, let me show you some sample wills, inshallah. Okay, I'm just going to flip through this real quick. It looks like this presentation. I'm going to show you 3 sample wills. So you should make a will or get a trust. It costs a little bit more, but it can save you a lot of money. And we have will. Okay. Here is a will made from Quicken. You've heard of the company Quicken? So this is Quicken Will Maker Pro. Okay, you're going to go through it. You're going to sign your initials, everything. This is there's my name. This is my will. Personal information. This is where I reside. You got to revoke your previous wills. I'm married to who? Oh yeah. I'm like literally, yeah. You cannot see it. That's right. So that doesn't help, does it? All right. So Let me see if this will open. Uh, by title. Can we open the attachment on the Mac? Yeah? It's embedded into the PowerPoint. Oh, you know, I put on the USB. It's fine. I'll just skip this. No, no, no. I put it here. Just give me the will. Here we go. Now you'll see it. All right. This is Quicken. Quicken Will Maker Pro. Zoom. No, I'll tell you exactly how it's made. I'm trying to zoom in here. Here we go. Okay. So this is instructions, what you do. Going down here, you have your personal information, revocation of your previous wills. I'm married to someone. These are my children. This is disposition of my property. I have calculated my own inheritance. This is what my wife gets. This is what my mom gets. This is what my dad gets. This is what Yusuf, my son, gets. This is what Maryam gets. So my wife gets 1/8. My mom gets 1/6. My dad gets 1/6. Yusuf gets 13 over 36. Maryam gets 13 over 72. Calculate that, right? You have an executor. I chose not to name an executor. I overrode this will anyways. It's not my real will. Payment of debts, payment of taxes, severability, and I got my signature. So this is very, very basic will that was designed from Quicken Will Maker Pro. Let me show you another will. I calculated them myself. I'll show you an app that's coming up. It's going to make your life easier. Then you have another service here. Here's another will. Should be launching. There. I forgot where I downloaded this from, but I have like a bunch of them. We were doing a project at CIU on wills. So the last will and testament. So this is a little bit longer. So you got revocation, preamble. This is your family you put in there, executors. Put in your funeral and burial, what you want, your directions, who you don't want to be at your funeral, in case you don't want someone to be there. All right, I give, devise, and bequeath. Taxes, huquq Allah, the person puts some Arabic terms in there. Infancy clause, trustee, powers, investment, settling claims, distribution, income tax, community property, supreme clause, etc., etc. Okay, that's done. So that's another will. Here's another sample. These are just samples. This is from the My Wasiya service, if you use it. Hopefully I'm not revealing their copyrighted secrets or something like that. So this is me. Long preamble, details of family, tangible property. So this is an example where they're going to put all the details in. So residuary estate, appointment of guardian, etc., 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 fiduciary powers, etc., etc., insurance, nominee, administer claims, self-dealing, elections, qualified property, use of income, sever joint trust, incorporation, depreciation. So you can see they can get longer. Funeral and burial rights, transactions, miscellaneous provisions. Here we go. So here, this type of will breaks out everything. So it says the son is going to get such and such thing. The daughter is going to get 1/2. If there's this, if there's 2 daughters, they're going to get 2/3. The father gets 1/6. All the rules have been rewritten into this will to clarify, hey, this is going to be the case. So you got mother, wife, husband, apportion heir, grandfather, son's daughter, full sister, all of the rules. Now, of course, there are even exceptions to the rule. So all of these rules cannot actually work in all scenarios. So anyways, you put all those rules in, paternal uncle, son, full uncle, son, etc., etc., going through, explaining who should take care of things, and then you sign. So you see, wills can get complicated. They can be as simple as 1 paragraph, and they could be as complicated as 26 pages or longer. This is from My Wasiya. So Sheikh Joe Bradford, he launched his website. It's called mywasiya.com. I don't get any commission, although I probably should. But you can get that done on his website. So here's the thing. So whether or not it's notarized, it's nice, but so, no. Yeah. Mm. Coming, inshallah. All right. So that is the samples, and the last thing I'm going to show you is this website right here. So there's two places where this was just exercise for you. So there's a really good website. This is one website that I like. You go here, and you could do all the inheritance calculations, and they'll give you all the, so you don't have to do it yourself. And then if you know Arabic, this is the best app that I've found on iTunes. It doesn't exist on Android. It's like one of the reasons why I went back to the iPhone, even though I don't really like it. Al-Mawarith. It's one of the best apps that exists out there. And it's only on iTunes, and it's in Arabic only. So I highly recommend that. That's the one that I use when people ask me questions. Otherwise, you can go to this one, and then there's a bunch of other ones as well. Okay? And lastly, last two verses of the same verse about inheritance. Let's see, where were we? Yeah. So conclusion, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, تِلْكَ حُدُودُ اللَّهِ وَمَنْ يُطْعِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ يُدْخِلْهُ جَنَّاتٍ تَجْرِي مِنْ تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارُ خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا وَذَلِكَ الْفَوْزُ الْعَظِيمُ. These are the bounds set by Allah. Talking about inheritance. Hudud doesn't just mean like the punishments in Islam. These are the bounds and limits set by Allah. Whoever obeys God and His Messenger by following them, God will admit him into gardens through which rivers flow, abiding therein. That is the supreme triumph. And then He says, the end of the inheritance, He says, وَمَنْ يَعْصِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ وَيَتَعَدَّ حُدُودَهُ يُدْخِلْهُ نَارًا خَالِدًا فِيهَا وَلَهُ عَذَابٌ مُهِينٌ. Says, but whoever disobeys God and His Messenger and exceeds His bounds, meaning His limits, the rules that He has set, God will admit him into a fire to abide therein, and for him is a shameful and humiliating punishment. So don't take these rules lightly. Take these rules seriously. Make sure that you get something prepared so that you will get your inheritance distributed correctly. So we have some lawyers in the room. We have other people who do inheritance as well. We have, I think, is the table outside or something like that? Is there a table outside? Sana? There's a table outside? Okay, alhamdulillah. So they asked, so whoever emailed us and they got something. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm. 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 Unless you override that. Right. Mm. Right. Mm. Right. Mm. Mm. Right. So yeah, so this is a very common question. Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up. So this is one of the concerns that people have. They say, you know what? So father dies, or the husband a person dies, leaves behind a wife, and they say, well, all these kids are going to be taking some of the share in the house, and then what's going to happen to the woman and all of that? I mean, if we just zoom in on that question, what we're saying is that your own children and your own family members are simply going to just leave the mom behind. What I got it. I know. So what that means is, but if we're going to take that as the default, what you mean is that's a very dysfunctional family. And I know we have a lot of them. I get that. I got that. I understand that. But when we're trying to practically, we'll talk about that in a moment, we're trying to rationalize and understand the rules that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put for us. We're not assuming that dysfunctional families where everyone is fighting each other is supposed to be the absolute standard and norm. Right? That's not supposed to be the default. Right? That's supposed to be the exception. Of course it happens, but it's not the default. Right? So when we're trying to understand these rules and we're trying to understand, well, why is it that, we can't just look at family members as individuals, right? On one side, right? So that's important thing to keep in mind, okay? Now, but hear me out, inshallah. So what do we do in a scenario where we expect that's coming? You're going to see this coming a mile away. Before you die, if you have a problem where the kids don't even care about what's going to happen to the mom, you can see that usually before you're going to see it 1 year before, 5 years in advance. So what do? You simply take precautions in advance to make sure that that person is going to be taken care of. So when you're giving gifts to certain members of the family, or you're going to give something to your spouse, or you're going to give something to your parents because you think they're going to be neglected when you die as well, because let's say your mom's only getting 1/6. You're worried about your mom. And you're like, but she's only going to get 1/6. What about my mom? It's not only spouses. People's parents get neglected, and what happens? The parents get thrown into old folks' home, right? So what do? It's a simple solution. You make sure you give them something in your lifetime before you die. Go put a property in there. Go give your mom a house. Go give your dad a house. No, but then that doesn't add up, right? So here's the thing. If somebody has money and you're saying that it's not fair because the wife is going to get stuck with 1/8, or the mom is going to get stuck with 1/6, or the dad is going to get stuck with 1/6, we should give them more of the share. Why couldn't you give them more of the share when you were alive? Whatever money you had, why couldn't you give them more when you were alive? That's the question. You could have. But I'm telling you from experience, I get hundreds, maybe thousands of these cases. The reason why people don't do it is because they want to hold on to their own wealth for the duration of their life, and they don't want to give anything to any of the family members while they're alive. And then when they die, they say, but Islamic inheritance is unfair. I want it to be redistributed some way. Why did you have to hold on to all of your money when you were alive? You're not willing to give anything to your mom, to your wife, to your spouse, to your kids, nothing. And then when you die, you say, oh, Islamic rules of inheritance, it doesn't make sense to me. The society has changed. We have dysfunctional families. We need to rethink the entire system. Let's just throw these verses to the side or reinterpret them and have our own Martin Luther-like, reformation in Islam. So we have a new type of Islam. This doesn't work because you could have done it 1 year before you died, 5 years before you died, 10 years before you died. Take care of your family when you're alive. And it's a very simple solution to the problem. I've seen hundreds of cases, I'm telling you. And when people follow this, you can go ahead and you can distribute whatever you want to whoever you want to make sure that they're taken care of. And then whatever is left, whatever the 1/8 or the 1/6 or that's going to get distributed, it's going to be taken care of. And they're going to be fine. Inshallah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's the great thing about imams. People still don't listen to us when we tell them, but we don't have to do anything that they tell us, right? So, yeah. Mm. Mm. Yeah. That's the problem. I like my mom and dad, but I don't want to give them any property until I die. What kind of statement is that? No, I know. I'm just emotionalizing it, right? Because this is not the way it's supposed to be. That's my point. So if we're gonna follow Islam, we should follow Islam fully, to the entire extent, with everything. Inshallah, go ahead. Correct. This gifting is before you die. Bequests are only after you die. Bequest is written before you die, but it gets executed after you die. You gift on your own when you're alive, right? So let's say, for example, let's say I was concerned with my mom, okay? And I'm concerned that, let's say I had a lot of wealth, right? These are all hypothetical scenarios because I neither have a lot of wealth nor am I concerned for my mom because she's fine, alhamdulillah. But let's say I'm concerned and I'm thinking, what's going to happen after I die? I need some of this wealth to go to her. Okay, Mom, let me buy you an apartment so you're taken care of. Now, do I know when I'm going to die? No. But I'll go ahead and buy this for you right now. It's not a big deal. You're my mom, and you're taken care of, and I can feel comfortable. And I know that if I lose my job, I lose all my money. I know if I'm like, Mom, I need some of that apartment back. Can you kind of gift it back to me? She's got my back too. This is what family's supposed to be, right? But today, everyone just looks purely individualistic. No, if I give it to them, then they're going to take my money and they're going to do this. And it can't be like that, So we can't fall into that scenario. So that really the problem is with the way families are operating. They need to come back to one, it's not only laws, it's Islamic ethics of how you treat your family members, how you care for your family members. Is your wealth the number one priority? If you got a problem, you say, I'm concerned for my daughter. I'm concerned that my sons are not going to treat my daughter correctly and she's getting less than the share of the sons, and the sons have really good jobs, and the daughter, I'm concerned she got married to a really bad guy, and this guy is, he's lazy, he doesn't get a job, and he doesn't, support the family. What do I do? Well, it's not fair. The Islamic inheritance, she's not going to get it. Well, what do? Just give her a lump sum of $100,000. Here, I'm just bought you a house. If anytime, this guy's not working out for you, you're taken care of. This guy's supposed to be supporting you anyways. If he doesn't support you, you support him. According to one opinion, you can count zakat being given to your husband because he doesn't have a job and he's able to work. Yeah.
So, what I'm hearing from this, if I feel like nobody's going to take care of my mom, and she's only going to get like 1/6, I can have a bank account or anything where I'm depositing money into, which will be made available to her after I pass away, in addition to that 1/6 of whatever she gets from my inheritance.
No. So when that bank account that you're depositing into is made available to her, no, it belongs to her now. So if it belongs to her now, she can access it now. It doesn't belong to you. And you can't take it back. So this is this thing about ownership. That once you give ownership of your wealth to someone else, it is transferred over. So you cannot have it both ways, right? You cannot say, well, I'm going to put this money in this account for you. At the same time, I have control over it. So if I ever need it, it's mine, I'm going to use it. But then it's temporarily yours. That doesn't work. It's either you give it to them or you're not going to give it to them, right? That's the default. Now, of course, in law, there's a lot of tricks and things. I understand. In law, there's a lot of, nuance and all of that stuff. That's where you want to probably get a trust mate, right? If you have a lot of wealth and things like that. But I'm telling you, this is the general rule. And now you want to make sure two things, okay? You want to make sure, number one, ownership is clear-cut from the law in which you're functioning, the parameters in which you're functioning in the state in which you live, number one. And number two, you want to make sure, number two, you want to make sure you avoid taxes as much as possible. This happens to everyone. People put money in their kids' accounts in order to avoid certain type of taxes, and you have gift tax, and then you have that tax and all of that stuff. So you want to maximize or minimize the amount of taxes that you're going to pay. You want to minimize probate, or you want to avoid probate completely, which is the court fees that you're going to have to go through, and potential lawsuits and disputes and all of that stuff, with the will and all of that. So you want to do all of that while still living up to the basic principles of Islam that Allah has set forth for us, right? And that's quite tricky to get all of that done. That's why it probably is good if you have a lot of assets. You probably definitely want to get a good lawyer who has a good understanding of Islamic law, or at least a basic understanding of how to apply this, as well as a good understanding of the law system today. Okay? Yes.
Is there a limit to how much you can give to charity?
How much you can give to charity when you're dying? 1/3 is everything.
So if you want to give some for your grandchildren and charity, the combined max is 1/3?
Yes, everything is combined. So let's say you want to give to your next door neighbor, you want to give to your best friend, and you want to give to charity. 10%, 10%, 10%. You only have 3% left to work with. Once you hit 1/3, you cannot give any more to anyone else.
Are there any restrictions on giving gifts while you're alive?
So that's a good question. Are there restrictions on giving gifts while you're alive? One, you have to be fair to your children. Okay? So in terms of fairness, yes, you have to be fair. But when you're alive, there is certain principles of if there is merit to giving more of a gift to someone because of what they're doing, they're more righteous, they're more, doing something else, you can give more to one child, and you can give less to a child if they're engaging in sins and they're utilizing that money for something wrong or something like that as well. So there are some limits, but generally you have an opening while you're alive to give gifts to kind of whoever you want, as long as your intention is not to exclude your heirs or deprive them or something like that. No. Which example you're talking about? Giving in charity and the 1/3? Yeah, as long as you're being fair, there's no limits. So that's a long discussion. So, alhamdulillah. Yeah, I don't know the password to this computer. So, hold on. Yes. Oh, oh. When you're gifting while you're alive? Okay. So, okay. So when it comes to gifts while you're alive, do you have to follow the fraction of 2-to-1 ratio when it comes to sons and daughters? So there's actually a difference of opinion among scholars. According to the school that I follow and according to many scholars in the Hanafi school of thought, it's supposed to be equal. It's not 2-to-1 ratio when you're alive. It's supposed to be equal. Okay? Yes. Hold on. Brothers, can we keep it down, inshallah? I can't hear. So. When person dies, he leaves 2 kids behind? Okay. Okay. Yes. Yes. Okay, the first scenario is when he dies, if he has kids, the wealth gets distributed to the kids immediately, even if they're 1 year old, even if they're a child, even if they're 6 months old, it will become their property. Now it doesn't mean you hand them cash, to the 6-month-old, right? Because they're gonna buy candy or something. But someone is gonna control that wealth, but it belongs to them. So that wealth is transferred. You do not wait to transfer that wealth. That wealth gets transferred over to them and they own it, but then there's a custodian over that wealth. In the second scenario, yeah, they're not. It's no. So they're just supervising that wealth. They cannot use that money for themselves. It's not their money. It belongs to that person, right? Huh? So allowance for administering the funds, which is reasonable, would be something if you're investing their money, right? So it depends on what's happening with the money. If that money just sits in a bank account and you have a custodian access over it, you don't take an amount of that just because you happen to have your name on that because you're not doing anything. So that would be unjust, right? So it really depends on the scenario of what you're doing with that wealth. But generally, if you're a custodian, you are going to be supervising that wealth. It doesn't belong to you. That's the key to keep in mind. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the child. Second category is person is missing. If they're legally pronounced dead, then their assets get distributed. If they show up 5 years later, the rule is if they show up a few years later and it turns out that they weren't dead, but they were declared to be dead, then whatever money is remaining is going to be redistributed to them, but they do not, the heirs who collected that money are not in debt to the person if they've already spent the money. In war zones and stuff, yes. 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 Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I know. And that's why even in the Hanafi school, the scholars, they say we should go with the Maliki position on this opinion, which is a few years of waiting, because the Hanafi opinion on this is too strict and it's not practicable. You have to wait till you basically die so your children will inherit. Yeah, so they say in this scenario you go with the Imam Malik's fatwa on this, and I believe it's like 3 years or something like that, inshallah ta'ala, to uh, uh, okay, I think I'm supposed to announce. Sheikh, can you come back in the room, please? Can you get him? He sent me half a text message. I don't know what the rest of it is. Yes. Yeah. After you die. No, you cannot do that. That's a very good question. It's very common. So people will say, oh, I have all of this jewelry. When I die, I want all of this jewelry to go to my daughter and obviously not to my sons, because they're not supposed to be wearing the jewelry. But you can't do that after you die. You have to do it before you die, right? Hmm? What's that? So here's the thing, okay? If they agree to forego this, what's going to basically be happening, it's equivalent to, it gets distributed between sons and daughters, and the sons are like, we have an understanding that we're just going to give it to our sister because we don't want this jewelry anyways. And if they do that, it's perfectly fine, but it qualifies as a gift being given from the sons to the daughters. Okay? Okay. Yes. Okay. I see. Okay, so if you own, if you have a mortgage or if you're paying off a car or something like that, who do you have debts to? Who do you have to pay off? Well, when it comes to those type of properties that you've not paid off completely, it depends on what your heirs want to do. If they want to pay that off, they're going to inherit the amount of ownership that you have, right? So if you needed to, you could either liquidate that and you could reclaim whatever percentage that you have that gets distributed to your heirs, or if they want to go ahead and they want to pay that off. But it's not talking primarily about those type of debts. When we're talking about debts, we're talking about things that you specifically owe to people on an individual level, and they have rights to those debts prior to your heirs actually receiving your shares. Okay? Yes.
I got two questions. One is about here, if one person, one household, or there's only one person who is working, this distribution is easy. But if both husband and wives are working, so the wife which owns the property, but they are working together as a community, right? So they purchase a house, they both invest it. So shall both the parties keep track of it? Because once their marriage is over, because they are
Yes. Exactly. So when if husband and wife or anyone, son and daughter, son and father, or mother and daughter, if they're owning something jointly, they should keep track of what share of ownership they have in that thing. And then that becomes the estate of each one of them. Okay? So it's very important to keep track of what you have, because this is what happens in traditional families. You have this large families, they have this pot of money between them. And there's like there's no division of who owns what. It's like all the brothers, all the sisters, they just own everything together. But that doesn't work out for distribution, because you say, well, one person's working more, one person's sitting on the island and relaxing. So where's the ownership? You have to have some type of clearly defined ownership. You keep track, exactly. You keep track of it. Yeah.
you were explaining, like if the person died, the property, let's suppose, to make it simple, he got only one son, and the property shifted to him, and whatever the portion from the wife is, it goes over there. There will be custodian because the child is underage, but assuming 6 months or a year, that kid also died. Then what's going to happen with that portion of it?
So that kid who dies, who had that money and he's still young, his heirs will inherit from him. So whatever he owns, so let's say You know, somebody dies, leaves money, $10,000 to a 3-year-old kid. The 3-year-old kid dies. Whoever are his heirs, including his parents or whoever else there is, they're going to be inheriting that money from him. Not the custodian. No, the custodian doesn't inherit the money. Yes. You have a question? Sorry, go ahead. Oh, sorry. Let's close this up. Who has a question? Raise your hand. Okay, so 1, 2. Okay, I'll stay afterwards. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we're done, inshallah. Go ahead. 5. Inshallah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, that's not correct. Grandson will inherit when the son is not there. What you probably. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's not correct. He will inherit, inshallah. So the son takes the place, the grandson takes the place of the son when they're not there. The grandfather takes the place of the father when they're not there. So they will still inherit. Inshallah. Who's number 2? Number 2, inshallah. Go ahead. Uh-huh. Okay, if they pass away, you mean? They were supposed to inherit, but it didn't get through court, and then they died? Yes. Yes, the money should still be going to them. Because sometimes it can take years. It can take years, yeah. Islamically, yes, they should have. That money should have been considered their right, and then when it transfers over, they're gonna get their share, and then it's gonna transfer back to their heirs. Yes, correct. Yes, ma'am. So there's Islamic discussion, and then there's the law discussion, right? You just go by the law in which you live in, because that's the way accounts are gonna function. So whatever way it applies in whatever state you're living in, or state of California or America, you're gonna apply those rules in terms of when to hand the money over. Now there's I won't go into details of it, but let's leave it at that, inshallah. Who is number 3? Number 3, inshallah. No. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. So here's the thing. Regardless of how it exists on paper, it should be a clear mutual understanding between them in terms of who owns what. What percentage of ownership does each one have in this wealth? And that's the problem with a lot of people. They don't clarify that. And that causes a lot of problems within the family. So they should have just a clear understanding between them. What does joint ownership on paper in this bank account mean for us? What does it mean, right? So you have to be clear. If it means 50-50, then it's 50-50. If it doesn't mean that, then, if you just put someone else's name on an account for whatever reason, you say, well, I'm just doing this for tax reasons or whatever it may be, but that was not the intention to actually have you that ownership, and that's understood within the family, then you apply that. See, this is the problem. So the idea of 100% ownership for both is not a concept that you can apply, because how are you going to redistribute things back, right? So that exists within society, but it doesn't exist within the fundamental framework of Islamic law. So there needs to be clear ownership of property in order for you to be able to distribute that property. It shouldn't be that way. That should not be the default. Yeah. Yes. Right. 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 Exactly. Exactly. Right. 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 Yeah. So the thing is, they should not be depriving when they know that it was done for a specific reason. They should not be depriving the people who actually have that ownership. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Mm. Yep. That's why we did this program, so that everybody knows. Yeah. So now that the program is done, we just need to share the link with everyone and make them watch it. Inshallah. So, yeah, sister. Mm-hmm. Mm. But she's not the real daughter. She has no blood relation. I got it. Yeah, yeah. So no, you don't have to share with her. But she doesn't actually have a share to the inheritance. But usually, when a scenario like that happens, they can leave a bequest to that person, or they should leave a bequest when you have someone close like that. Oh, so that becomes like her bequest, basically. Yeah. No, then you don't have to. If you're the only bloodline, then no. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I got it. Uh. Oh, so there are blood brothers of hers. Oh, uh huh. No, because you block her. Yeah. No, it doesn't matter about that. No, that doesn't matter. Yeah. Uh huh. Mm. Okay. I'll speak with you afterwards in in I have to figure. Yeah, one part I missed. One really important thing is it's very important to identify who remains alive, uh, and how they're connected to the deceased. Okay, so a lot of people will come and they'll ask you and they'll tell you something like, okay, so and so died and he left behind two brothers and a sister. Now, what they mean is that the person who died was the son of the deceased, and he said he left behind two brothers and a sister, including me. That doesn't mean that the brother and sister of the deceased, it means that they're children of the deceased. So people will often use the wrong terminology because they're referring to themselves in the question when they're talking about the deceased. So you have to make sure to identify who is remaining alive and what is their correct connection to the deceased before calculating things. Okay. Yeah. So I'll talk to you privately afterwards, inshallah. So I think we have to conclude this, inshallah. So I will stay till midnight, inshallah, and answer questions. But this live stream is going to expire, so we need to just last question, inshallah. Mm. So why not give them payments over a period of time? Mm. No. Mm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I understand that can be a challenge for some people. I don't know any Islamic workaround around that. Inshallah. طيب. All right. So we'll conclude. Inshallah, I can continue taking questions. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase us in knowledge, increase us in practice, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the wisdom and the effort to be able to implement the rules and laws that He has set forth for us. Ameen. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nastaghfirukallah wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Oh, I was told to make a quick announcement. We have a Hajj program that's going to be through IAOC, and we also have an Umrah in spring, and I was told by Sheikh Faqih, all the details are going to be announced later, only announce this part. It's done. Assalamu alaikum.